Welcome back to Fumbo's Witched. This is Saf Freeman. Today I will be talking on the topic control and coordination in human, which is part of the chapter control and coordination from the subject biology from the textbook Science and Technology as prescribed by Embos for class 10th. We know that in our body there are so many organs, different parts, like we have the hands, the legs, the skin, the shoulder, the thigh, the feet, and all of them, they perform their own functions. And while performing their activities, their work or their function, they do not clash with one another. Why they are able to do that? It is all because there is a system that control and coordinate all of them. So in this video, we will look in details about the systems that control and coordinates in human beings. After you have watched this video, you will be able to answer on the questions related to number 1, structure and functions of the human nervous system. You will be able to answer on the functions of the brain and its different parts, on the neuron structure and functions, and reflex action and reflex arc. There are two systems in our body that help in control and coordination in human. System 1 is called the nervous system, and system 2 is called the hormones or the systems of hormones. These two systems help the different body parts to perform their actions and their activities in systematic manner. In this video, we will study more in details on the nervous system. Nervous system in human. Nervous systems means the system of nerves. You know nerves? Nerves, they are the thread-like structures which run all over the body, which include in the brain, and those nerves, they are called nervous system. And the nervous system in human body is divided into two. One is the central nervous system, and two is the peripheral nervous system. If you look at this diagram, that area which is pink in color and this rod here, they form the central nervous system. While this is the brain and this one here, it is the spinal cord. Spinal cord is a thick nerve fibers which run from the brain deep through the vertebral column. And the peripheral nervous system comprises of all other nerves, like these nerves, and these nerves, which connect the different parts of the body, either to the spinal cords or to the brain, which is the central nervous system. So the peripheral nervous systems, they connect the different parts of the body to the central nervous systems. Brain is part of the central nervous system together with the spinal cord. Brain is a delicate organ and it is present inside of our head. Because the brain is so delicate and it can get injured so easily, it is well protected within the bones of the head, which we call cranial bones. And below the cranial bones, or below the cranium, there is a layer which is called meninges. And this meninges has 3 layers in it. And between the 2 layers, very close to the brain, there is a fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. The action or the function of this cerebrospinal fluid is to act as a shock absorber, mean to absorb any kind of shock which may injure the brain by means of jerk and jolts. And the brain, look at this diagram, and the brain is comprises of 3 regions, which is called the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. Diagram, forebrain, this one till here, it forms the forebrain. And the forebrain, it is the center of intelligence. It is the center of the intelligence, and it is also the main thinking part of the brain. And the forebrain consists of this cerebrum and the diencephalon. The diencephalon consists of this thalamus and hypothalamus. And the midbrain, you looked at this diagram here, this area here form what is called the midbrain, not that. This area here form what is called the midbrain. The forebrain and the hindbrain is connected by the midbrain. And the hindbrain, it consists of the pons, the medulla oblongata, and the cerebrum. This is the cerebrum, and that is pons, and this is medulla oblongata. Below the medulla oblongata, right here, there is a spinal cord which runs down to the vertebral column. Now let's see the important centers or the important control centers in the brain, the cerebrum. Let's see, what does the cerebrum function? Cerebrum is the seat of consciousness. Cerebrum is the seat of consciousness, and it is the main thinking part of the brain, and it is also responsible for memory, for reasoning, for thinking, for perception, and for perception of the stimulus. Then we have thalamus. Thalamus, you look at this diagram, thalamus is this one, thalamus, and that thalamus controls the movement of facial muscles. It controls the movement of facial muscles, like the look of our face when we chew, when we smile, and when we swallow, and also the movement of the tongue is controlled by the thalamus. And thalamus, it also has the center for taste, for cutaneous senses. Cutaneous senses mean the senses or the feelings that is present in, in the skin, like touch, pain, and pressure. And the next one, we have hypothalamus. Look at this diagram. Where is hypothalamus? It is just below the thalamus. And hypothalamus controls, fatigue, sleep. It controls fatigue, it controls sleep, it controls body temperature, sweating. And the next control center is the cerebellum. Cerebellum. Find in the diagram, where is cerebellum? This is cerebellum. What are the controls of cerebellum, or what does cerebellum act? Cerebellum, it is the main, it maintains equilibrium, posture, and muscle tone. Equilibrium is like when you walk straight, that is called equilibrium. And when someone drank alcohol, they cannot walk straight. Sometimes they move to the left and sometimes they move to the right, which shows that they are not able to control themselves to walk straight. I mean, there is no equilibrium in their body. Their equilibrium is being, distorted. That means when you drink alcohol, the alcohol which is there in our body will affect that area, which is called cerebellum. So the person which has this cerebellum affected will not be able to maintain posture, will not be able to maintain equilibrium. And another system is, another control center is the pons. Pons, what does it control? Pons, along with medulla oblongata, they control breathing and respiration. And the last control center is the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata, it is this area here. What does medulla oblongata do? Medulla oblongata has centers for cardiac, respiratory, and vasomotor activities. Cardiac means the action of the heart, respiratory, like the action of the lungs to exchange gases, and vasomotor activities. Vasomotor means the action of the blood vessels, like the artery and the veins. Medulla oblongata also coordinates reflexes like swallowing, coughing, sneezing, and vomiting. Those, actions which is done without our control, they are done, in a fast and, in a very short time, like coughing. It is called reflexes. So those kind of reflexes like swallowing, coughing, and sneezing, and vomiting, they are all controlled in the medulla oblongata. The peripheral nervous system, as I have told you before, It is made up by the nerves or the brain fibers, which carry impulses to the brain or to the central nervous system, and also from the central nervous system. Peripheral nervous system consists of two kinds of nerves, and they are called somatic nerves or somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. What are these somatic nerves? The somatic nerves are those nerves which connect the different parts of the body to the central nervous system or to the brain or spinal cords. Look at this diagram. The nerves which come out from the brain. The nerves which come out from the brains, they are called the cranial nerves, whereas the nerves which come out from the spinal cord to the different parts of the body, they are called spinal nerves. The cranial nerves, they originate at the cranium or from the cranial bones, and there are as many as 12 pairs of cranial nerves. And the spinal nerves, they are originated from the spinal cords here. And all spinal nerves are mixed nerves, that is, they have both sensory and motor fibers. And human body has as many as 31 pairs of spinal nerves. And the autonomic nervous system include those nerves which supply, impulses, which transfer the impulses between the central nervous system and the certain organs like the heart, the kidneys, the lungs. Those are organs which we do not control by ourselves, but they are directly controlled by the brain. So those brain fibers or the brain cables which connect those organs like heart, lungs, and kidneys to the central nervous system or to the brain, they are called the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system includes the nerves that control involuntary action and certain glands and smooth muscles. The ANS or the autonomic nervous system consists of nerves and ganglia on either side of the backbone. And again, the autonomic nervous system is again subdivided into two other types: parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system. We have been talking on the nervous system. The nervous system is made up of a specialized kind of cells called neurons. And the neuron is the structural and functional unit of the nervous system. Look at this diagram. Look at this diagram. This is a diagram of a neuron. This whole diagram is a neuron. And in the diagram of neuron, you will find that the body of neuron consists of three different parts. This one is the cell body or the cyton, whereas these things, this projection there, they are called dendrites, and this area here is called the axon. Prominent in the entire body of the neuron because it is big, thick, and very clear. And in the cell body or in the cyton, at the center of it there is a nucleus. There is a nucleus, and that nucleus, around the nucleus there is a neuroplasm, is a kind of cytoplasm. And in the neuroplasm you will find a large number of grain-like structures which are called the nuclear granules. And from the cell body there arise these things which are called the dendrites. And the functions of the cyton or cell body is to bring the impulse or a message from there, from the dendrites to the cyton. And we have been talking about the messages or impulse. What is that impulse or messages here? Impulse is the message that travels in the nerves or in the brain. Again, the dendrites. The dendrites are kind of fingers which are projected or coming out from the cyton or the cell body. And these dendrites, they are large in number, and their function is to sense or to perceive the stimulus. say the stimulus is somewhere here, and that stimulus will be perceived or will be carried into the dendrite first of all, and from the dendrites that message will go to the cyton, and from the cyton that message will enter into the axon and travel like that till it reach the end of the axon, which is called the nerve ending. Let's see axon. Axon, this area, the whole area, axon, it is like a dendrite, but is the largest, very large, and its function is to carry the impulse or the message from the cyton. An axon is covered by a multi-layered sheet called the myelin sheet, which is not uniform in its entire length, because at certain point there are cuts, and those cuts, they are called the node of Ranvier, and the cytoplasms of axon is called the axoplasm. Now let us see how does an impulse travel in the body. See, from one part of the body to the other parts of the body through the nerve system. Look at this diagram. There are two types of neuron, I mean not two types, there are two neurons here, the neuron 1 and the neuron 2. Remember, this area is the dendrite, and this is cyton, and that is axon. Same thing here. Same thing here. Dendrite, cell body, and axon. Let's say there is an impulse somewhere here in the muscles, and that impulse or message then was perceived or was perceived by this dendrite, and the message is then passed by this dendrite into the cyton of the cell body. From the cyton, that message travel into the axon. From the axon, it reached to the end of the axon, is called the axon ending or the nerve ending. And from the nerve ending, that message has to pass into another neuron. And how can it pass from one neuron to another neuron? There is a junction or a joint between the neuron, and let's say that is the junction between the neuron. It's a point of contact, and that point of contact between the nerve ending of one neuron and the dendrites of another neuron is called synapse. Look at this diagram here. That is synapse. This one here is the nerve ending of the axon, and this is the dendrite of another neuron. So synapse is a point of contact between the nerve ending of one neuron and the dendrites of another neuron. And the message or the impulse has to pass from one neuron to another neuron through this synapse. What is a stimulus? If you don't know, stimulus is any change in environment that triggers or that make the organisms to respond. The nervous system performs three different kinds of actions, which were called involuntary actions, voluntary actions, and reflex actions. When the brain or when the nervous system performs certain actions together with the will of the person, it is called voluntary actions. Voluntary actions. So it is an actions of a person which is done by the direction of his brain and also with his own will. For example, when a person sees a snake, what he may do? He may run, or he may call for help, or he may try to kill it. And there are certain organs which perform the actions without us being aware, without us controlled. They are directly controlled by the nervous system itself, and such actions are called involuntary actions. For example, The control and coordination of certain body parts like the heart and respiration is under the direct control by the brain without the will of a person. And there are certain kind of actions. There are certain kind of actions which is called reflex actions. For example, to understand this, suppose you touched a hot object, let's say a pot which is in the fire. You touch it by accident, and without being aware, you realize that your hand has already removed itself from that hot object, and this kind of action is called reflex action. So reflex action is an action of a person which is automatic, mechanical, and very rapid in response to a stimulus. Look at this diagram. You see in this diagram, you see there is a hot pot and the hand of a person. The hot pot is like a stimulus which generate heat, and this person touched the pot, and without being realized, he removed that hand away from the pot. Now let's see how that happened. The pot is a stimulus, and this stimulus was touched by this forefinger of the person, and that forefinger of the person, after touching the stimulus, it produced the impulse, and that impulse then passed into these green nerves, which is the sensory neuron, and this impulse traveled through the sensory neuron till it reached the spinal cord, and in the spinal cord you see there is a red line, and that red line is called the relay neuron, and the relay neuron will take the information from the sensory neuron, process that information until it realizes what to do, and then after that it will carry that information, pass it into another neuron, which is the motor neuron, and this motor neuron, which is blue in color, then pass that message into the another organs, which is called the effector organs, to tell it do something. And so the muscles, which is an effector organ, it pull away the hands of the person from the pot. So this diagram shows the flow of the message from the forefinger of a person passed through the sensory neuron, then to the relay neuron in the spinal cord, from the relay neuron to the motor neuron, from the motor neuron to the effector organs, which is a muscle in this case. So what is a reflex action and reflex act? A reflex action is a rapid, automatic and mechanical action of a person while he responds to a stimulus. Whereas reflex act, it is the nerve pathway during reflex action is called the reflex act.